Good morning, everyone. I'm Michael. I'm going to be your host for this morning's session. We're looking at a fairly new topic for our Sage 50 accounts webinars, and it's transaction grouping. So almost going back to basics in a certain respect. Now, hopefully you'll be able to stick around for the full session this morning. Should last around about 45 minutes. Originally, when I ran this last week for the very first time, we thought maybe about 30 minutes, but we got quite a few questions, so expecting it to be about 45 minutes this morning. Now, just before we get stuck into the webinar, we'll run through a little bit of housekeeping. So if you've attended webinars before, do bear with me. For those of you that are new to webinars, you don't need a microphone for the sessions. If you've got one, it'll be muted. If you do enable it, you can't unmute yourself, so you can't actually speak to us as such. Any questions, you'll need to pop them into the questions panel. Just need to click that little speech bubble icon on the taskbar. It'll expand. You'll be able to start typing in that little box in the bottom right hand corner. Remember to click send so the question comes through. Now, it is just myself running the session with you all this morning, so do bear with me. When you submit your questions, I'll try and pick as many of those up as I can. If I can, we'll maybe veer off and try and answer that with a bit of a demo or just maybe a straightforward answer. If I don't get a chance during the session, we'll pick them up at the end, or failing that, I'll drop you an email later today. If anyone wants a copy of today's slides, they are very minimal today. It is mainly demo, but if anyone does want a copy of the slides, then those are available to download during the session today. Now, as normal, the sessions is being recorded. You'll be sent a link on the automated email that goes out round about an hour after we finish. So you'll be able to access that again and maybe have a bit of a recap if needed. But it'll also include links so you can register for our upcoming webinars, which our timetable currently runs to the end of April. And also it will give you a link to all of our recordings. So if there's any topics you've missed or you think maybe you're new to webinars, have a good look through that. There's well over 100 recordings now, just all on different topics. Right, okay, let's have a look at what we're going to be covering. So quite a short agenda, but there's loads to get through the day, loads of demonstrations. As I say, it's going to be mainly concentrating on demonstrations today, just so you can see what we're talking about. But we're going to start with a little bit of an introduction, talking about grouping criteria. Presumably it'll sound quite obvious when we talk about that, but again, it catches people out. And if you understand grouping, you can then choose when to group transactions and when not by the way that you enter your transactions. Talk a little bit about headers and splits as well. It's imperative we talk about that if we are talking about grouping, just so that you understand the differences. Again, nice and simple. I'll just keep it as simple as possible. And then we get stuck into the demonstrations. Once we've done that, just right at the end, explain more about the additional support, tell you about some of those webinars we've got starting on, I think they start on Monday next week, our management report sessions. So if you are interested, you'll be able to get yourself signed up. And then if there are any outstanding questions, I'll move across to those as well. Well, keep your questions and your comments coming. As I say, I'll just try and pick them up as we're running through today's session. So let's start with just talking a little bit about transaction grouping. And it's probably something that you've come across and maybe you've been caught out before, where maybe transactions do group or don't group and you were expecting it to be the other way. So basically transactions will group together. So by that, I mean, if you're entering maybe a batch of payments, for instance, you're entering a number of transactions on the same screen, they will be grouped when they're entered at the same time and they meet specific criteria. Now that grouping criteria is quite straightforward. It's the account, the date, and the reference, and the transactions must be consecutive when you're entering them on the list. Now, if anything of that criteria, so those 4 elements, mainly just the 3, because you would expect them to be consecutive if you're entering them and want them to group. So if anything of that criteria is different or left blank in the case of the reference, then transactions will not be grouped. So that's the criteria. It's account reference, so if it's the likes of a batch supplier invoice that we got on the screen there, if you look down, you can see the account references for the 2 transactions are the same, the date's the same, and the reference column is the same. It doesn't matter about anything else. So it doesn't matter whether nominal codes are different, values, tax codes, that makes no difference. So it's really those first three columns. So we'll try and sort of show you a number of different scenarios for that today. Now, if we come on to headers and splits as well, now I don't want to try and bamboozle anyone with sort of the terminology or anything like that. So headers and splits can be one header to many splits, or even just on a one-to-one basis. Now, we've got an example there on screen of where there's one header and there's actually two splits. So that would be the instance of, say, we'd entered the invoice that was on the previous slide. We've saved it. And when we look at the supplier's activity, in the top box where you've got it split between the two, the summary, the header, as it were, the summary of the total transactions added together, that's what's listed in that top box. It's what we would term header information. So if you enter a customer invoice in invoicing, when it updates to the customer account, you'll have what you would term a header, giving you totals, etc. It'll still be showing as a transaction, just uses the first transaction number of the group of them. So that's what you would term the header. And the breakdown, the individual item lines, which is what appears in that bottom box, that's what you would refer to as the splits. So if you ever hear that terminology, that's what it refers to. Now, if you're wondering how many transactions you've got, we always refer to the number of splits that you've got rather than headers. Because let's say you've got a blank company, you enter one invoice which has got 50 items on it. Those 50 items would all post as individual transactions. So you would have 50 transactions or 50 splits, but you would only have one header, which is the summary of all of those items added together. Now, if you're wondering how many you do have, nice, easy way to check that, if I just quickly share my screen, is within your software, if you go to help and then about, let's give that a few moments to load. If we scroll down to the center column and you've got some data information, so I can see I've got, in my case, I've got 811 headers, so those top levels of the transactions, but I've also got 1,382 splits. So that's how many transactions I've got in the software, the number of splits. Usages, just in case anyone's wondering about that one, I don't want to go too in depth to that one because maybe that's for another day, that one. But a usage is a link between two transactions. So let's say you've got an invoice and a receipt. When they're allocated together, that allocation is what you would term a usage. And again, a receipt might have a number of usages because it may be paying off a number of different items. So it'll be linked to a number of different splits. But it's headers and splits, that's what we're concerned with in today's session. Right, so what we're going to do is we're going to pop back to the slides just for a moment. These are the demonstrations that I'm going to quickly run through now with you. So you can see the different scenarios and where transactions are grouped and where they aren't and what options you've got to determine that. So we're going to start with invoices and credits and then we'll just work through the rest of those scenarios. So let's head back to my screen. And we're going to start in invoices and credits. And what we'll do is I'm just going to create a new invoice. And I'm going to call up this, just use that first customer that's listed, that ABS Garages. And what I'll do is I'm just going to add some items onto it. Doesn't really matter what they are. So we'll do 3 items. And I'll just make sure that first one has a price there. So this one, if you think about the invoice, it's got one account reference. So it would be the same for all of the individual items. The reference number that it's going to use by default would be the invoice number. So that's going to be the same for all of the items. And they're all going to use the same date, the date of the actual invoice. So as you'd expect, when we save this transaction, or save the invoice, sorry, and then what I'll do is I'm going to update it to the ledgers. So it's for 3143 in total. So we'll just update ledgers. Just preview that one. So it should update to the customer's account. So it shows me the individual items that have been updated, so including the 3 transaction numbers that it's been allocated. But if we now go back to customers and find ABS garages, so this one, we'll pop into the activity, and you'll see that invoice that we've just entered, so this one here in the top box. So it's using the first transaction number of the 3 items, 1383. It's an SI, sales invoice. It's invoice number 92. So they're all on the same customer. They use the same date and they've all got the same reference. So in the top box, it just gives me a summary, the total of the invoice. When we highlight the transaction though, in the bottom box, we've got the breakdown. Now you actually might see more information than that, but we've got the breakdown. So remember at the top, it's what you term the header, and in the bottom, it's what we term the splits. Now, if you're looking at yours and you're thinking, well, I haven't got that divide, it's just this option at the top where you can hide the detail or you can show the detail. If you highlight the different transaction at the top, so let's just pick on this one. So transaction 1371, you can see in this instance, showing 2 items, but actually this first one is what you would term a split, and this secondary line is what's allocated against it. So this receipt, this receipt here is actually paying off this invoice. That's how we can sort of track in this bottom box. But for that invoice we just entered, it's one header at the top, and you've got the 3 items which are grouped at the bottom. Now, when we come to pay off that invoice, so if we pop into the customer receipt screen, and if we call up that ABS garages, and you can see that the invoice that we just entered for 31.43, it's just showing 1 item currently. Now, some invoices, and you'll be well aware of this, some invoices can have 50 plus items on there. So what we don't want to have to do, or you may want to do it, is we don't want to have to go down and show each individual item as being paid. Now, you do have an option for that if you want to. So for those 3 items, let's say one of them, I'm thinking, oh, well, customers disputed one of the items there. Maybe there's a problem with it, so they're not paying that item just yet. What I can do is tick this box here, list invoice stroke credit by item line. So it's listing the individual items themselves, so those splits. As you can see on mine, there's a lot more information then. So that first invoice, invoice 58, you can see there's loads of items there. It lists the individual items themselves. We just scroll down, we can see that invoice 92, you've got the 3 items listed at the bottom. So we can pick and choose the items that we want to pay then by drilling into the invoice itself. So it's just this little setting here. Now, if you always want it to show those items, what you can do, let's just discard this for the time being. I've got mine set with a default as not to select that, but if you always want yours to be selected, you can go into settings, bank defaults, and it's this option here, list item stroke credit by item line. If we tick that and then go back to the customer receipt window, call up that account again, you'll see this is just ticked by default. Again, we can change it if we want to, but it will now be ticked by default. So it just depends which way you like to work in that sort of scenario. Right, let's just close out of that for the time being. Right, next we're going to start entering some batch invoices. Now, the way that grouping works for batch invoices in both the sales ledger and the purchase ledger side, so the customers and suppliers, the grouping works in exactly the same way. So I'll go into a batch invoice and we'll choose the supplier. We'll give it a reference. What we're going to choose today, we'll do 211. We'll just put test in there. We'll do £100. and I'll continue tabbing down to the next line. Now, if you've not come across it before, you've got options along the top. It's something you've always been able to do. So you can just either click the button to copy whatever's in the box above, so if you're typing it in or selecting it from the list, or you can just press F6 on your keyboard. So because I'm wanting these to group, I need to make sure the account reference is the same, the date and the reference itself. Let's put labour in that one. We'll say that's £50. Now, if I save that, again, those 3 bits of criteria plus the transactions are consecutive. When I click save, you would expect these to be grouped. So into that supplier, have a look at the activity, and you can see in this top box, let's move the divide a little bit. So in the top box, we've got the one item listed. It's got the details there for both items. So £180 in total. And when we highlight this transaction in the bottom box, again, we can see the breakdown. Now, if you do another one, so this time we'll do another batch invoice. We'll use the same customer. I'll just use today's date again. And I'll do 213. Let's do test again. £100. We'll come down to the second line. Now I'm going to do the same reference and same date, but this time I'm going to put a different reference in. I'll see that's test 2. We'll do £100 in there as well. So we've got invoices totaling £240. Now this time, because something is different, so in this case, you use a difference reference, it shouldn't group the transactions. It meets all the other criteria, but the references are different, so it shouldn't group it this time. We'll save it, back into the activity, and you can see we've got 213 and 214 listed separately now. So if we highlight 213, it's got the one item, so one header with one split. Again, 214, one header at the top, one split. Now I can't retrospectively group those transactions together. The only thing I could do to group them would be to delete them and re-enter them. I couldn't go in to edit them and say, right, this one, it should have been reference 213 as well. So actually, if I go into the edit the transaction and change that, save it, yes to the changes, it's still going to list it. So it's at the point when it saves it that it determines how many headers and how many splits there are. So when you enter the original transaction. Right, let's do another example. So we'll do, again, we'll just might as well concentrate on the same customer. Sorry, same supplier. This time I'll just leave the reference blank. Now, remember what I said earlier with the criteria, it's got to have something in there. If there's nothing in there, then it won't group it. So as long as there's something in there and it's the same, you would expect the grouping to work. So I'm going to make those key 3 columns the same account reference, same date, and I'm going to leave the reference blank in both instances. We'll do £40 for that one. So again, £220 is coming up as in, oh, wrong column there. I'll do £40 for that. So £228 in total it's coming up with. We'll save it, close out, have a look at the activity, and you can see the 2 transactions, again, they've been listed separately. Final demo for this one. I'll use 215 this time. And I'll go to say part 1, £100. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to save it. I'll do the next one. Again, 215. And I'll say part 2. Again, we'll just say £100. Save it. Now I do get a message there about potentially duplicate transactions. I've got that option switched on, but that's fine. But if I now go back and again have a look at the activity one last time, you'll see that those two transactions, they're listed separately. So I've avoided the grouping by saving in between. And that would work throughout the program as well. So if you were entering a bank payment, for instance, you thought, well, I don't want these to group. You need to make sure to avoid the grouping that something is different, or you would enter the first part, save it, the second part, save it, etc. So that's the key, again, the key for that. Now, when it comes to paying off your purchase invoices or allocating credits, you're exactly the same position as what we just looked at a little bit earlier. So if we bring up that supplier, go right down the bottom, again, we've got this option to list the by item line. I can switch it off and then I'm back to the summary. So again, it works in exactly the same way as what it did for the customer receipt when we looked at that earlier. All right, quick question from Lauren there. How do you turn on the duplicate transaction notification? You'll find that one within settings, company preferences. Should ask me for my password again. And then on the parameters tab, it's these ones. So you've got an option that says check for duplicates in customer batch entries. Got mine ticked. And then on the right, you've got a one check for duplicates in supplier batch entries. So if you're doing that, and as you're entering the transaction, just in case maybe you've been keying one in and you got interrupted, and you think I'll pick up from where I left off, you're probably going to key it in with the same information. So that's when it would pop up and say, hold on a minute, this looks like a duplicate. Are you sure? So to give you that choice, just gives you that little bit of warning up front. That's where you'll find it. So settings, company preferences, parameters tab, and then you've got those two settings. Right, let's move across to the bank accounts area, because that's the other one where we get quite a few support queries on the banking side and the way that transactions have grouped. So we're going to start with, we'll do a bank payment. So it's going to work in pretty much the same way. Account reference, which in this case is the bank account number, the date, and then the reference. So those first three columns. The criteria is going to work the grouping criteria is going to work in pretty much the same way. There is a subtle difference with this one, and we'll come on to that one a little bit later on in the demo, so about a minute or two. So if we just enter the first one, so bank account 1200, we'll use today's date. I'll pop in a reference. I'll just do 216 this time. Let's do parts. We'll do a value. We'll come down. Again, I'm just going to press F6 so that those first three columns are the same. I'll leave the extra reference blank. Again, that's nothing to do with the grouping. We'll change the nominal code this time. I'll just say labour. And then we'll say that's £35. For the sake of argument, I'll change the tax code as well. And then we'll just save that transaction. So if we go and have a look at the, well, this is going to depend where you look at the transactions. So if we pop into transactions and we go right down to the bottom, let's just refresh that. So we've got the two transactions listed, reference 216, you can see them there. We pop into the bank account screen, we have a look at the bank activity. What we've got is we've got one transaction listed here. So it's a bit like, say you went to the supermarket, let's say you were doing your home accounts, you went to the supermarket, you buy some food, let's say you buy some clothing at the same time. Now, if you were categorizing and wanting to break down your payment for your household accounts, for instance, you could do that, but when you look at your bank statement, you only have one payment going out, and that's the idea of the grouping. So again, it's that same criteria. It's got the same account, same date, same reference. It groups it together. Now I mentioned there was a subtle difference this time round as well. So if we go into settings and then bank defaults, you've got this option on the right hand side, second option down on the top there, group bank transactions. Now if I take that tick out, it will be switched on by default, that one. But if I take that tick out and OK that, and we go back to entering a bank payment or a bank receipt, it's going to work in exactly the same way. So 1200, today's date, I'll do 217 this time. Just do test, £100. We come down to the second line. I'm going to make those first three columns the same. I'll leave virtually everything else the same. And we'll do slightly different value for that one. So ordinarily, you would expect these transactions to be grouped, but because we've switched that off for bank transactions, so that setting within settings, bank defaults, group bank transactions, we disabled it this time. When I save this transaction, and then go and have a look at the activity, you'll see that the transactions are listed separately. So if you never want your bank transactions to group, you can switch that option off. If you like to be sort of pick and choose which ones group, then you know the criteria. It's those first three columns. They need to be consecutive if you want them to group. If you don't want them to group, then something needs to be different, or you enter one, save it, one, save it, one, save it, etc. I hope that makes sense. So that's the main grouping in Sage. Obviously, there are other impacts on the rest of the software as well. So while we're talking about bank, we'll quickly pick up on bank reconciliation. So when we're looking at that activity, you can see we've got that transaction there, 216, which has two items within it. 217, they're just listed separately. Now, if you pop into the reconciliation screen, just OK that, just OK the messages I get as I go in, scroll to the bottom of this list, then the transactions at the bottom of that list for reconciliation purposes, they'll be grouped in exactly the same way as what they were listed against the bank account. So again, 216, there were two parts to that, but I can't see the breakdown. There's no little tick box or anything, so I can see the breakdown on that one either. Whereas 217, the items are listed separately. Now, even though they're listed separately, 217, it's not that much of a problem, to be honest. If we're coming in to reconcile and I'm looking at my bank statement and I'm thinking, right, well, I've got a transaction on my bank statement. It's a payment for £267.60. And I know it's actually these two transactions which contribute to that value, then I can just select both of them. So I'll highlight the first one, I can hold down my control key, select the second one, and it tells me the two that I've selected there, that I've highlighted, that's the total of what we've highlighted, and then I can just match them. So rather than worry about deleting the transaction and re-entering it so it is grouped, I could just highlight a couple of transactions at the same time. Again, I'll just select the however many it is, make sure I've got them selected, and then I can match it. And that would be the equivalent of that one transaction on my bank statement. Now, possibly the most complicated part about grouping is the final one I'm going to show you. Let's just discard that. Is I'm going to pick on two customers. So we'll pick on this Bob's Building Supplies and we'll pick on this Fred Bryant. So these two. So I'm going to enter an invoice. So we'll do 218. Just say parts. And we'll say it's £100. And I'm going to do a second one, which is for Fred Bryant. And I'll just say my invoice number this time is 219. We'll say that was for parts as well. We'll say that also was for £100. Now, obviously those are on separate accounts, so they're not going to group. We've got different account references, same date, And it wouldn't matter if it was the same reference. They've got something different. So the account reference would stop them grouping. They need to post to separate customer accounts. And I'm going to save that. Now, the situation can arise where, let's say you've got these two companies that we just posted that invoice, those two invoices against. Let's say they're part of the same group of companies. So I've entered two invoices, but actually when I get paid, I only receive one payment, and it's from the head office. Or maybe one of the companies pays their invoice plus they make a payment on behalf of the other one as well. So in that sort of situation, to show those two invoices being paid off, I've got to enter two customer receipts. So if I bring up that first one, Bob's Building Supplies, there it is, 218. I'm just going to pay this one in full, and I'm going to give it a reference. I'll sort of use today's date as the reference, so 27th of the 3rd. And I'm going to save that transaction. However, the receipt also covers the invoice against this customer. So I'm going to show this one as being paid in full. And again, I'm going to use the same date. So, sorry, the same reference, I should say, which I'm using today's date. So it's got the same reference, and I'm going to save that. Now, if I have a look at the bank activity, you'll see that the two receipts are consecutive on the list, but they are shown separately. And if I go into the bank reconciliation window, just click past those few messages, go right to the bottom, again, we'll see them listed separately. So there is one final setting what I want to bring your attention to, and it's not widely used, this one, because it's not a great advantage to you, but it's this one. If we go to settings, bank defaults, you've got this option here, the second option down on the left, group items in bank rec. So that's exactly what this option is for, not to be confused with group bank transactions. This just groups them within the bank reconciliation list. So just okay that, into reconcile. Again, I'll just quickly move past these messages that keep popping up. And if we scroll down to the bottom, you can see that we've got one sales receipt listed now, but because it's a group transaction, it's for the total value, so representing that one receipt that we received. Now, the same would work with supplier payments as well. So that's what that option is used for, but again, it's not a massive advantage ticking that box. Now, if you want to see if transactions are grouped, what you can do is you can right-click your column headings, and there is the grouped column, which I can switch on, and it just puts a Y in it. It would indicate that's the one I entered before, where I entered one, saved it, entered the next one, saved it, both of the reference 217. You can see that's now grouped that one as well. But that's the intention behind that setting. It enables you to group transactions where, for whatever reason, you've needed to enter them, maybe against different customers, different suppliers, or maybe you forgot. But for that to work, the transactions do need to be consecutive on the activity. Doesn't matter about being consecutive on the reconciliation list, they've got to be consecutive on the activity. So if you've entered any other transaction in between them, and that's on the activity, the grouping's then not going to work. Hope that makes sense as well. But that setting that we've just looked at there, it is for the purposes of the bank reconciliation list only. Right, now I just want to quickly pick up on import as well. So if anyone imports data, and specifically import transactions, I think it was version 29, no, actually version 28 this changed. So prior to version 28, when you imported transactions to your audit trail, so let's say you were importing maybe a list of direct debits, for instance, that you've got saved on a spreadsheet. If you imported that, it would just list all those transactions as separate entities. Or maybe if it was a batch invoice that you were, again, importing, it would list them all separately, so there would be no grouping at all. But when you go through the import option these days, so file imports, and then when we go to next, which is on step 2, you now get the choice. Do you want audit trail transactions, which is the way it's always done it? Or where possible, do you want grouping to happen? In which case, it's audit trail transactions grouped. So same criteria, the transactions in your import file, they need to have the same account, same date, same reference, and they must be consecutive. And obviously, for purpose of importing transactions, there must be the same transaction type as well, because you can have a good old mix-up on your import file if needed. So that's just something to watch out for next time you come to import. Let's just cancel out of that. If we pop into transactions, we find a transaction that was grouped. So we'll go back to this one at the beginning, 212. So that was grouped, the 2 parts. Obviously in transactions, it lists the individual parts. So it lists what we term, remember, the splits. So the individual items. If we highlight any of the items where they are grouped together and go to edit, it will list them in this box here. So you get the summary at the top, essentially what you term the header information, and then at the bottom you've got the split information. And if you need to amend one of them, you just need to highlight it on the list, click edit, and it would provide you with the split information. So split information, it's got things like the individual value, it's got things like the tax code, the nominal codes in here, the individual detail of the item line itself, that's all listed. Similarly, if you were going down the deletion route, so we got these 2 which are grouped together. If I click delete and then click delete again, it's actually going to flag all parts of that grouped item as being deleted, just like deleting an invoice, for instance. And the final thing to quickly pick up on is reporting. So we pop into customers just as an example, and we'll pick on this ABS garages again. That's the one we started with. We'll pop into reports, and if we choose something like a day books report, now we'll start with a summary. If we choose the summary report and just accept all of the default criteria, what we'll see at the bottom here, let's zoom in a bit so you can see that a little bit clearer. On the summary report, it displays header information. So header being the first transaction number of the grouping, tells me the number of items which are essentially grouped, so 3 in this instance. It's an SI, and it's got the total of that total value of what you term the header information. So summary, when you're running a report and it says summary, it'll tend to mean, right, you're going to get the header level information. Detailed, on the other hand, is going to give you split information. So it's going to look at the individual items. So if we preview the report this time, obviously it's a lot bigger, but we can see at the bottom, I'll zoom in, I can already see that myself on my own monitor there. So if we zoom in, we can see we've now got the breakdown, the individual items. So it was for invoice 92. We can see the individual items with their individual values. Chris, you mentioned there, does the bank grouping setting work within the bank feeds reconciliation? If you're referring to the initial setting that we looked at, then so going into settings, bank defaults, this one here, which determines whether transactions group or don't group, then yes, that one should pull through to bank feeds. But this one here, group items in bank rec, I think, I'm not 100%, but I don't think that one would apply to that one. It's just the bank reconciliation screen itself where it would group those. But again, even if it's not grouping, that's not the worst thing in the world. It's easy enough to select multiple transactions. Just to say, right, well, actually that one transaction that's downloaded, it's equivalent of these two. So easy enough to do that. So have a look out for your reports. So summary, it's showing you essentially header information. Detailed, it's showing you what you would term the split information. Right, so as I promised, loads of demonstrations there. Now, if you've got any final questions, please pop them into the questions panel. I'll try and pick those up. We've only had the two so far, one from Lauren, one from Chris. If you think of anything, do pop them in there. If you think, well, what about this scenario? What about this screen? Plenty of time to cover that if anyone wants to hang on. But pop your questions in there. Remember to click send. If you want a copy of today's slides, which again, as I mentioned at the beginning, it's top level slide information that you're going to get on that one. If you want the detailed information, the Help Center is the place to go. Help Center, nice and easy to access. You can access that from within your software at any time. Just either press F1, it'll bring up the help relating to what you're looking at. These days as well, you get the help link in the top right-hand corner of the screen that you're on. Again, it's context sensitive, so it'll bring up help relating to wherever you're working. Alternatively, you can just open your browser, head along to sage.co.uk/help, start browsing through. You've got the panels there at the bottom, which is what we term the various support hubs. So you can see one there for managing your VAT, protecting and repairing your data, financial year end, or you can just search. Now, we've got some exciting webinars coming up over the next, well, starting today. This one's this afternoon, Copilot. So if you've heard about Copilot, and you're going to hear lots about this going forward. Copilot is our new sort of AI-based digital assistant within your software. So some of you you might be already using this. Some of you might be thinking, "Ooh, AI, I don't want that integrating with my account." It's quite a common reaction, that one. Copilot's not going to do anything to your account automatically for you. It's not going to make postings or things like that. It's just going to provide you with insights into performance, or things like helping you to manage debt. So which customers owe you money, which customers have an overdue balance, which customers have a balance that's going to be due in the next 7 days, managing stock, monitoring business performance or profitability, that type of thing, improving data accuracy, helping you to spot potential issues. So have you keyed something in with maybe the wrong tax code? Quite easy to do that. Maybe the wrong nominal code. It's going to try and identify that based on historical information. So if you want to find out what it's all about, we're running the very first webinar on that one this afternoon. That's at 2 o'clock. We will be running it from this week. It's going to be weekly from there on. So if you want to maybe want to come along and see what it's all about, then please get yourself registered. But plenty of opportunity to sign up for one of those if you are interested. The link will be included on your follow-up email to the main registration page. From Monday next week, we're starting our we've started badging a series of webinars now. So you can earn a digital badge by attending these sessions. So management reports is our next one. It starts on Monday. We're looking at management reports. I've got a little video which I'll quickly play for you, just lasts about a minute. It's just Matt, myself and Jackie just telling you a little bit about what we're going to be covering. So I'll play that and then we'll come back and pick up any questions anyone might have.
Exciting news, our next badge is available to book now. From April the 1st to the 11th, dive into our management reports badge and master everything you need to know about understanding management reports. We look at the foundations of your reports by looking at the nominal records, how to set these up and how they form the basis of your reporting, before delving into the chart of accounts and configuring that to your needs.
Moving on to the trial balance, balance sheet and profit and loss reports. How to run these for your current financial year and how to run these into the future and for prior years. We'll also show you how to reconcile your aged debtors and creditor reports and how to account for any differences before showing you your business dashboards, the perfect feature for monitoring your key business data at a glance.
Attend 5 out of the 6 sessions and complete our quiz to earn your badge. Your achievement will be added to the Accreditable portal where you can share your badge with clients, colleagues and suppliers, showcasing your journey to becoming a Sage expert. Don't delay, get yourself registered now at sage.co.uk/webinars and take the next step in your professional development.
Okay, I'm back live with you at that point. If anyone's really been paying attention there, it did say from the 1st of April, which is Tuesday, they actually start on Monday. So 31st of March they start. But they run for 2 weeks. If you attend 5 of the 6 topics plus one of the quiz sessions, then you would earn that digital badge. Right, brings us to the end of the session. If there's anyone got final questions, last call, pop them in there. I'll try and pick them up. But many thanks for coming along. I hope you've enjoyed it. And maybe it's just got rid of that. Hopefully it's just maybe you've had that light bulb moment and thought, right, that's how it groups the transactions. Having a better understanding, obviously it can only be a good thing. So I hope you've enjoyed it, found it useful. If you've got any comments, thoughts, feedback you want to share, pop it on the survey that comes up as you leave the session. It should take you about a maximum of about a minute. Give us a score. Any thoughts, ideas, topics you'd like to see covered, pop it all on there. Your follow-up email with the links, even if you want to register for this afternoon's Copilot session, get yourself registered. The link will be included on the follow-up email. You can access the recordings and there'll be a recording of this session attached as well. So you'll get that round about an hour's time. So something to look forward to if you want to get yourself registered for after your lunch. Hopefully I'll see you then. Right, we'll end the webinar just at that point. No additional questions. So many thanks for coming along. Hopefully I'll see you again.